Welcome to Speakernomics, the official podcast of the National Speakers Association. I'm Kenneth Kinney, but friends call me Shark, and like you, I'm a professional speaker, and I love listening to Speakernomics. Speakernomics is a professional speaker show that will help you thrive and grow a speaking business, so you too can change the world, one keynote session, workshop, and speech at a time. And on this episode, we welcome Lenora Billings-Harris, a legend in the sport of speaking. She's a CSP, a Hall of Famer, a Cavett Award recipient, a past council chair of the Global Speakers Federation, an award-winning author, thought leader, and international speaker in the areas of inclusion, diversity, and unconscious bias, and she's even received an honorary PhD in humanities for her academic and professional body of work in the DE&I field. Lenora, welcome to Speakernomics. How are you today?
Well, thank you so much for having me. I am fantastic. Happy to be here.
Thank you. Now, to all my speaking friends, being inclusive with our audiences is key, regardless of the topic. But to tell a compelling story, you've got to get them hooked early on with that content that they want to hear, learn from, and then act on later. How do you include everyone into your legendary story? And before we jump in, make sure to go to speakernomics.com. That's where you can find the tips, insights, and knowledge to help you become a better speaker, build a better business, and get paid to speak. Lenora, let's dive in.
All right.
First, I want to ask, because I got to see you present twice at an NSA events, but in particular, the one that I really, really love, talked about this. How do you create a compelling opening that has audience members leaning forward in that first 60 seconds?
That is such a great question. And one of the reasons why it was so fun to do that panel that you're referring to, that Willie and Connie and Mark and I did. It's different for each speaker. However, I think generally speaking, as you think about overall the message that you want to deliver to your audience, you really need to put yourself in their seat, or, we would always say their shoes, but their seat, because people are so distracted. The question you have to ask yourself in their seat is, what's this person going to tell me? Just assume that they're somewhat skeptical, regardless of what your topic is. Certainly they are with my topic, but just assume that they're somewhat skeptical because they have a million other things to do. And then, given whatever your message is, what can you do or say that will grab them immediately? So it could be a statistic that will just blow them away. It could be a story. And in my case, for many of my keynotes, I use the bookend technique. And that is, I told them part of the story and left them hanging. Now, you also need to think about literally how you would do that. I mean, the words that you use. So if it's a story, you need to be in the story, not just telling a story of something that happened a while ago. So part of it is the performance of it. And the other part is what you would say specifically given your topic. So shock them or surprise them in some way.
That's great. Then how do you tailor your messages to resonate with such diverse audiences across industries and cultures? You speak all over the globe, and every audience is obviously unique. But when you think about the many, what have you presented in 50-something countries as well? On top of that, I mean, every group is different on its own just here in the States, let alone every group all over the world.
Mm-hmm. Well, and that's what I find exciting, quite frankly, because I am just genuinely curious about different cultures. And I use the word culture very broadly. Once we are on the platform, that's the reward for all the work we do to get there in the first place. And so the answer to your question is a lot of homework. Really think about your topic. But then, just like you would do a spell check, do a culture check. In other words, learn about the people you're going to be speaking to. Now, if you're speaking primarily in the US, for example, some of the things that you can do homework wise is go online and read some of the newspapers of that local area. Find out what's going on. Find out who the sports teams are. Find out what season it is. You don't have to like sports, but don't make a baseball analogy when it's football season. So, find out what's going on and who the stars are and how you might weave that in. Now, I know when oftentimes, especially in the US, when people say diversity, they're thinking ethnic diversity, gender diversity primarily, but there's all kinds of diversity. And every location has its own culture. So the more you can find out about that organization, go to their website, find out things that the CEO said that maybe you can weave in. In other words, do things that demonstrate that your talk is specifically for them. And some of and everything I'm sharing with you, frankly, I have learned from other people somewhere along the way, most of whom were members of NSA. So really connect with your NSA buddies and find out what they do as well. But what I always do is request to interview 3 to 5 people who are going to be in the audience. And I request that they not all be people who are going to love being there, because I want to get a sense of what's that skeptical person thinking, what, kind of what's on their mind. And that will also help me know how to connect with the folks in the audience. Then lastly, what I would say is that we should not expect that we're going to convert 100 people, 100% of the people in our audience. My job is not to get people to think the way I think. My job is to get them to think. So if I approach it that way, and again, not just as it relates to DEI, but even if it's life management or life balance, which I'm not sure there really is a balance, but regardless of what your topic is, what is it you want them thinking about? And then what do they already know or are already connected to or already care about that you can attach to what you're presenting, so that in the end, each person will be thinking, never thought about it that way. And they hopefully are thinking, she was speaking just to me.
Yeah, something you said earlier about cultural differences. I remember it's been several years ago, but I spoke to a group in Brazil and was with a friend of mine, and I'm a big college and NFL football fan. And early on in the speech, the speaker, another American speaker, got up there and started talking about American football, and I was just slapping myself in the face, going, "This is not going to register with anywhere else in the world." And I think he thought football was tailored to him, but it was not something he should have covered early. All right. Well, then one of the things, obviously, with anything like DEI, though, is how do you approach tough conversations on stage, especially when addressing, and this could be in any field. This doesn't have to be about DEI or anything else, but especially when addressing a sensitive or polarizing topics. We often hear so often to worry about certain trigger words and things like that get people, but this is deeper than that. This is a lot of subjects that really can create some visceral feelings in people that may sit on one side of the fence or completely on the other. But again, you've got to make certain that you include everybody in that audience.
Mm-hmm. So, well, when I'm delivering a keynote, obviously that's mostly one way. It's a little bit interactive, but not like it's a workshop. But so many of our members are learning and development experts, and they deliver workshops where something controversial or trigger words might come up. I encounter that type thing when I'm a panelist, most often, or when Q&A has been built into the keynote. So I'll start with the end. If you are going to have Q&A, never, ever, ever let it be the very last thing you do. So, because you never know who that last person is that's going to ask you a question that it would take you 15 minutes to answer and you only have 30 seconds. Or it could be a question that is one of those polarizing kinds of things. And the last thing that happens is what people are going to remember. That's why your openings and closes are so important. So what you do instead, when your meeting planner asks you to include Q&A, is to say, I am happy to do that. In fact, for me, it's the most engaging and enriching part of the presentation. And what I would like to do, this is what I would say to the meeting planner, is to have the Q&A 5 minutes before we're at the complete end of my talk, so that I can use my close. And what I'll do to make that happen and keep us on track is I, of course, will be paying a lot of attention to the time. And then I will propose to the audience that we have a few minutes for Q&A before I close. Then we get the questions, and I'll be again watching the time. So I'll be able to say, and this will be our last question or something along those lines, to cue the audience. And then I'll answer that last question. Then I'll go to my close. Now, I already said in my case, I use bookends. So I know exactly how long it's going to take me to complete my Annie story at the end. And people are wondering, well, whatever happened to Annie? So, they're eager to hear what else is going to happen. So that's how I handle it. But again, really recommend that you don't end it on the Q&A. Now, here's one other thing that I started doing several years ago, and it has been such a hit. Oftentimes, the best questions start happening just as you're running out of time. People get warmed up, and now they're really asking those questions. What I say to the audience is, I imagine that there are additional questions. I want to answer every one of them. So if you give your question to whoever the meeting planner is, or whoever is the person you've decided ahead of time, if you give your questions to Quinetta, whatever her name is, I will answer your question via video. I will tape my answers and send that video to Quinetta to share with all of you after the fact. Then that way, regardless of what the questions are, how many there are, I know what the question is ahead of time. I can prepare it, and it's easy enough to shoot a quick video, whether it's Zoom or anything else. And I usually will tell the meeting planner ahead of time that I'm going to do that. And they see it as a huge plus. It costs them nothing. It makes me look good. Now, to your question about those triggers, those polarizing kinds of things, it's interesting you asked me that question now, because I am transitioning from what I have been doing in the past as it relates to DEI to something still under the umbrella of DEI. But what I have come to know is that when people do get curious about folks different from them, most people do not know how to have a conversation when they know that person different than them thinks an entirely different way, whether it's politics or any number of things. They don't know how to have that conversation. So my nonprofit organization, it will be focused on teaching people very specifically how to have those difficult and critical conversations. And it's an online, it'll be an online program, 10 weeks. Because going to a 3-hour session or an hour session and figuring out what the steps are for anything for that matter may sound good. You might feel good about it. Sounds easy, sounds simple, but frankly is not easy to do. So I will be teaching people very specifically how to do that. So when I get asked one of those trigger questions, or when somebody says something that's a trigger for me, what I know I need to do is take a breath. You know, my grandma used to say, take a breath and count to 10. Well, there actually is some brain psychology and physiology around that. And I will take a breath and smile so I can calm down. And you've seen several people do this. Newscasters do this well, reporters, that is, or people being interviewed by reporters. They'll say, that's a very good question. And usually it means they're giving themselves a moment to figure out what it is they're going to say. And then the next thing I do is, instead of trying to share with them my point of view, because that's where we get in trouble, we think we're going to convert somebody in one conversation. That's not going to happen. Not going to happen. What I do instead is say, help me understand why you think that, or why you believe that to be so. And be very careful about your tone, because if it comes across as being judgmental, like, why would you think that? You know, now you're starting the battle already. So it's really a matter of asking a question rather than responding with an answer, and giving yourself time to calm down for a moment. Now, if it's a panel, then I get asked a certain question, I may not respond with, why do you think that? But in my circumstance, if I'm on a panel or something like that, I've pretty much, after 33 years doing this topic, have been asked practically everything. So I'll note it. Take a breath.
Now for a little speaking trivia, who invented the microphone? Back with the answer in just a moment. Before we jump back to the show, here's a moment with speaker, author, and NSA member Marty Dickinson. Marty, what does being part of NSA mean to you and your speaking business?
I'll give you three answers to that. The first one is that when I joined NSA Colorado in 2004, I didn't even know what a professional speaker was. And the first speaker I saw there on stage was Willie Jolly. And by the time he was done with his hour-long presentation, my jaw was on the ground and I realized, oh, that's what a professional speaker is, and that is what a professional speaker does. I think everybody should join National Speakers Association just to experience that and to be around speakers so that you are constantly seeing what professional speakers are delivering today. And the second one I would suggest is that, I joined Toastmasters a long time ago, and it took literally 6 years for speaking to become part of my soul. But I learned through National Speakers Association that the business of speaking needs to become part of your soul as well. And that takes time too. So that's what NSA as on a national level brought to me, was to constantly be around people who were living and breathing and eating and sleeping the speaking business, so it is constantly on your mind. And resulting from that was number 3, and that is building not just meeting other speakers, but building deep, lifelong relationships with speakers. Scott Friedman, and I mean, there's so many people out there I could name that I've met along the way, and they are still in the business today, even after 20 plus years that I've been involved with this business. So I think there's a genuine, you can actually look at how successful a speaker is and look into you kind of reverse engineer into how many speakers they have deep lifelong relationships with. And that all stemmed from National Speakers Association for me.
But do you sing like Willie Jolly?
What's that?
Do you sing like Willie Jolly now?
Oh, heck no. Not even close. He has a great voice.
And here's the answer. Although Alexander Graham Bell received the first patent in 1876 for his electromagnetic microphone that transmitted intelligible speech, it was not deemed workable enough for commercial telephone usage. It later took more development from other inventors like Emil Berliner, Thomas Edison, and David Edward Hughes that more closely recognizes the microphone technology that we're used to today. And now, back to the show. Well, I'd be remiss as we get towards the close if I didn't ask you to describe briefly what is Ubuntu.
Thank you for asking. So, Ubuntu is a Zulu proverb, and I learned it on one of my first trips to South Africa. And once it really settled, I became very clear about why I was put on this planet and needed to do work under the umbrella of DEI. Ubuntu means I am because we are. We are because I am. Now, that's the translation. I know that's a little too woo-woo for some people, but what it really means is that we're all connected in some way. So, and if you really go back in anthropology and all of that, we are all connected. But in present day terms, what that means is I need to be mindful of what I say and do because it impacts you directly or indirectly. And my hope is that you will be mindful in the same way. So just to give a quick example that's not people specifically, on the trip that I just completed earlier in the year, I went to several places where there were so many plastic bottles on the beach, you couldn't use the beach. And it wasn't because the people of that country did it. It was because of what washed up from the ocean coming from countries all over the world, which as a diver, you see that kind of thing. So every time I use a plastic bottle, when I might have to use one, I immediately now start thinking of what can I use this for again instead of just tossing it away, because I know it impacts other people. So ultimately, Ubuntu says we need to learn how to interact more effectively with each other because we do impact each other and we're all connected in the end.
Amen. Thank you for thinking that way as well. So I have a feeling that I know what your answer is going to be, but I have a question that's coming to you from a previous guest. And based on what we were talking about earlier, I think this is going to be good. This is going to be good. We all get caught up in the business of speaking. It tends to be something we talk about way too much, but it's not really us if we don't identify ourselves that way. What do you do for fun?
Well, so
A really tough question, but a great question.
I know, right?
It should not involve anything speaking wise.
Yeah. Well, oftentimes people think what I do is depressing. Like, geez, it is hard, but, because because of the things I deal with, but it's energizing for me because there isn't anything somebody else can say to me that's going to take away from who I am. And I know what my core is. I know what my values are. So I'm energized by the work that I do. And what I do for fun, even though my speaking has taken me all over the world, is I travel. I love to travel. And specifically, I love to travel by cruising. Because not only do I get to see wonderful places, I only have to unpack once. And then the community on the cruise ship is a whole nother exploration in and of itself. So I cruise.
Have you ever spoken on a cruise?
I have. That's how I got into cruising. That's
there you
how
go.
I fell in love
Combine
with
the two. There you go. All right. So, Lenora, what is a question that you would like to ask a future guest on this show?
We are experts at using words. And what I would love to know is what we should be doing to make sure we're using words accurately. Here's how I mean that. Oftentimes I'll hear people on TV talking about whatever, and they say lesser or less instead of fewer, or it's those kinds of little things. I hear many people saying often instead of often. Now, some might say you're being picky, and maybe I am. However, I believe as professional speakers, we should know appropriate grammar, not to lose our accents, but rather just to know the right way to do it. Because here's the thing, when we make faux pas, we just lost some people in the audience for a few seconds, and maybe we did it right in the midst of the most important point we were going to make. So ask that person, what could we be doing on a regular basis to improve our grammar?
Well, as a speaker who graduated from the 13th grade at a state university, I will agree with that completely. And I know to run my keynotes through Grammarly to at least check them there to start. All right, well, let's do a quick recap then based on Lenora's legendary advice. Number one, a great opening is different for every speaker, but you have to think through the lens of what's being in their seat. In their seat, you have to ask yourself, what is this person going to say? Whatever your message is, make it something that grabs them early, quick, and gets them hooked. She uses a bookend technique and leaves them hanging to the end. Be in the story, not just the storyteller. Number two, when tailoring your message, make sure to tailor it to be infinitely curious and do the research, do the homework, do a culture check, make it local to them wherever you are and wherever they are. Make it specifically for them. She approaches this not to help them think how she thinks. For her, it's to help them think. Number three, if you're going to have a Q&A, never, ever, ever let it be the last thing that you do. You never know what the last thing they would be asking, so you don't want to leave it on the wrong note to end on. Have the Q&A several minutes before and leave yourself a good close. Another thing, the best questions often end up when you're running out of time. She says, I imagine there's some additional questions, so make sure that you give your questions to the meeting planner, and then she answers them, and I love this, in a thoughtful video after. That's really going to get the audience engaged with her and help people connect later. And again, remember, most people don't know how to have this conversation. We get so often thinking about how we speak on stages or when we're doing sessions, but a lot of people don't know how to have the conversation to help themselves think differently. Help others learn how to at least have that conversation and foster it. Lenora, thank you so much. I'm looking forward to see you at least on another NSA stage or any other stage sometime soon. Any last closing thoughts before we speak ourselves off this stage?
Don't take ourselves seriously. Take our topic seriously, but have fun in the process.
Absolutely. Friends, make sure to join us at speakernomics.com and let your voice be heard. I'm Kenneth Shark-Kinney, your host of the National Speakers Association's podcast, Speakernomics, and this has been another legendary episode of the show. Thank you, Lenora, for being part of NSA for all these years and for all of your insights for the show. And everyone listening, thank you for the privilege of your time. And remember, Speakernomics is a podcast where you'll learn to speak, get paid, repeat.